The Council voted on the contentious issue after a Senate recommendation that the new policy be adopted. The university's Chancellor and Vice Chancellor, Max Price, had repeatedly said the inclusion of race in the admissions policy was undesirable and that the alternative proxies for disadvantage should be found. Other indicators for disadvantage aside from just race would now be taken into consideration when deciding on student applications. The applicant's home language, parent education, whether the parent was receiving a social grant, and other factors would now be considered. The new policy has however met opposition. UCT Progressive Youth Alliance said the policy had changed to suit those in top management positions who wish to keep the university wide. Alliance members include the ANC Youth League, Young Communist League of SA, SA Students Congress. The Higher Education Transformation Network has also slammed the council decision. The network's Hendrik Makaneta said it was against the change in policy as black students would be affected in the long run. The network, formed about 3 years ago, described itself as an independent network of alumni from various higher education and further educational institutions. It had previously said UCT was not committed to transformation and was attempting to exclude black students. According to the UCT, the exact weighting to be assigned to such indicators and further details of the proposed new admission policy will be determined only after the council decision.
Now, for more on this, we are joined from our Cape Town studio by the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, Dr. Max Price. Doctor, good morning to you and welcome to AM News.
Morning, Elvis. Thank you for having me on.
Now, the policy has been criticized as part of anti-transformation in higher learning. What's the university's response?
Elvis, I'll come to that. I wanted to say I listened to the introduction, and it is not the case, as some narrator said, that I believe that race should not be a part of the admissions policy. So I just want to clarify that. I'm not sure where they get that from. The new policy is shifting because we've always had set targets and we continue to increase the number of black students, and that must surely be the main measure of whether we're achieving transformation or not, and I believe we are. What's changed is that in the past we really had to treat black students or black applicants as a separate group, as a separate category, because there were so many strong applicants who were white, and most black students were coming from underprivileged schools, township and rural schools, often from educational backgrounds which didn't allow them to compete. And so the only way that we could get a fair transformation happening was to use what we called race baskets. In other words, all of the black students would indicate that they were black, coloured indicate they were coloured, Indian and white, and they would only be competing against themselves in that pool. We always have a minimum threshold. No one gets admitted who won't succeed, but within the baskets they weren't competing against each other, because if they had been in one basket, not many black students would have got in based simply on marks. What's happened over the last 20 years is that more and more black students are going to really good schools and coming in with good results. And so it's just not necessary to put all of them into a separate basket. And what we find is today, when we put them all into a common pool and we rank them by marks, a very large number of black students get in without any additional affirmative action intervention. And so the policy is changing with the changing times. And today, or the new policy proposes that there would be three ways into the university, or three aspects to the application. One group would be just selected on marks, and a significant number of black students will be selected there. A second group will be selected on merit, which is marks, but the marks are adjusted to take account of one's disadvantage. In other words, to level the playing fields. For example, if you have two students who both get 75%, but one of them has come from a privileged background and one from a less privileged or a rural school, it's very likely that the one who comes from the rural school is actually a better student with more potential, because to achieve that mark they've overcome huge obstacles. And so to really select the best students, we apply a disadvantage weighting to their marks, and we raise the marks by a certain amount, up to 10%, to make them more competitive, but actually we're measuring merit. And when we do that, because it's mostly black students who are disadvantaged, and I'm using black generically now, including coloured, for example, when we do that, that method brings in a large number, many more black students than white students. And then there's a third channel of admission, which is what we've always done, the so-called race baskets, where black students are only competing against other black students. And we have to keep that. in order to ensure that we do reach our targets. So I've made a commitment, and the university's made a commitment, that we're not going to go backwards from the progress we've made in diversity on the campus. We're going to go forwards, but that it turns out that it's no longer necessary to do it the way we used to do it before. And now, about 75% of black students will be selected without them having to classify themselves, without relying on race classification to do so.
So now we got marks, merit, and we have a race basket. But most student bodies are saying that the new policies were introduced to please white donors and affluent white families whose children don't get offers at the university. What is your take on that?
Well, I challenge the view that most student bodies are saying that. The ANC Youth League, Progressive Youth Alliance, is a small group on our campus, and I think the group that has been saying that is largely from other campuses. On our campus, the SRC has not said that this is an attempt to pander to white interests. They, I think, have accepted the bona fides of the university in trying to promote transformation. They have some concerns about some of the details, and it's those details which we are working with them to address. But the most important factor is that we set targets. The targets are set in race terms, and we will achieve those targets. That will be the measure of whether we are making progress with transformation or not. We think actually that this is giving a lead to the country and to other universities as well, because in the very long term, our constitution promotes non-racialism. It promotes an environment where not that people don't have race identity or that race isn't important, but where the opportunities are not distributed based on the color of your skin. And that similarly you're not denied opportunities based on the color of your skin. At the moment, in order to achieve redress, we all recognize that race is a relevant and valid basis for doing that distribution. But if we think what is the trajectory between the current situation, where we need to use race for redress, and the long-term situation, where race would not be relevant for distributing these opportunities, what is that trajectory? Well, we think we're breaking new ground in that trajectory. We have a hybrid policy which recognizes that we still need to use race to select part of the class, but because so many students are now coming from more privileged backgrounds, many black students, it's possible to not depend on race for that admissions process.
Now, the UCT Progressive Youth Alliance says that the policy is meant to exclude black students, and they also say that black students specifically, will be affected in the long run. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I just have to say that I believe they're wrong, and that they need to. I wonder whether they are sufficiently familiar with the policy. The Senate of the University and the Council are both committed to increasing the number of black students, and they have been persuaded that the policy will achieve that.
Are you going to be open to more talks, or is this the final policy on the table?
Well, it's the final policy in the sense that we have shifted from a policy that requires everyone to classify themselves by race and do the selection only based on race, to the new policy of having 3 bands and 3 channels into the intake. What's not final, and what we're certainly open to discussion and are committed to discussing with anyone, students and others who have better ideas of how we should do that, are things like what weighting should we put on the school that you come from, or how important and what weighting should we put on the fact that your parents don't have a university education, or should we consider any other post-school education as contributing to advantage or disadvantage? How important is it that you might come from a rural area? So there are ways in which the particular disadvantage, the emphasis we put on disadvantage, can be adjusted. Also, the size of each of these 3 bands, what proportion of the class would come from just using marks, what proportion would come from using merit, which is marks and disadvantage, and what proportion would come from the race baskets. That's certainly up for discussion, and we will model the applications that we get. We will test different weightings to ensure that we achieve the diversity we're seeking.
Now, Dr. Price, what is the current ratio in relation to black and white students on the campus?
Well, first, we do have quite a number of international students. In the case of So of undergraduates, I should emphasize that everything we're talking about is the undergraduate policy, not for postgraduates, and it's to take effect in 2016. Amongst undergraduates, we have about 15% international students who are not classified by race, so we have to exclude that. If we take the rest of the students, there are about 35% white students, about 30% coloured, also about 30% African, and the balance Indian.
So the balance is there.
Yeah, and so in other words, African, coloured, and Indian constitute about 60%, 60 to 65% of the campus at the moment. But it is different in different specific degree programs because of the different application pools for different degrees.
Doctor, thank you so much for the explanation and joining us here on AM.
Thank you.
Now, that was Dr. Max Price, the Vice Chancellor of the University of Cape Town, chatting to us about that.